Hey everybody, Dave here. I'm excited to let you know about yet another fascinating podcast now a part of the CyberWire network. It's called Eighth Layer Insights. Our good friend Perry Carpenter is the host and creator of this new show. You probably already know Perry as an influential author, security researcher, and behavioral science enthusiast, and he's appeared on our shows many times over the years. On Eighth Layer Insights, he delves into the complexities of human nature and how it influences security and risk. Topics include cybersecurity, psychology, behavioral science, communication, leadership, and much more. Check it out at thecyberwire.com/eighth-layer and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. I've already subscribed. You're not going to want to miss this one. Thanks. And now, a message from our sponsor, Insights. Insights believes that threat intelligence benefits organizations of all shapes and sizes by helping them proactively defend against an attacker's next move. That's why Insights is offering a free, personalized company threat intelligence report to help you manage the risk in today's cybersecurity landscape. Using only your company's domain, Insights' proprietary tools find potential external threats, including phishing attacks and dark web mentions, targeting your organization within minutes. To download your free threat intelligence report, go to insights.com/cyberwire. And we thank Insights for sponsoring our show. Iran's wiper attacks may have been posing as criminal gang capers. CISA issues an alert on the USAID constant contact credential compromise. European governments express concern over reports of U.S. surveillance enabled allegedly by Danish organizations. Epsilon Red ransomware is out and active. Ben Yellen looks at Florida Governor DeSantis' bill aimed at social media companies. Our guest is Giovanni Vigna from VMware with highlights from their 2020 Threat Landscape Report. And police come looking for cannabis farming and find coin mining rigs instead. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Tuesday, June 1st, 2021. The Iranian wiper, described last week by Sentinel-1, posed as ransomware in a campaign against Israeli targets. It's recently acquired genuine ransomware capabilities. Wired has an overview of the campaign, and CPO Magazine notes that one motivation for the imposture is false flagging. Tehran's operators appear to have wished to be taken for a Russian ransomware gang. On Friday, CISA issued an alert on the spear phishing incident in which USAID credentials for the email service Constant Contact were abused to send targeted phishing emails to a range of victims. Microsoft last week attributed the campaign to the Russian threat actor Nobelium, but CISA's alert is noteworthy for specifically declining to offer attribution. It was updated Saturday to read, quote, CISA and FBI acknowledge open-source reporting attributing the activity discussed in the report to APT-29, also known as Nobelium, the Dukes, and Cozy Bear. However, CISA and FBI are investigating this activity and have not attributed it to any threat actor at this time, end quote. They'll provide updates as their investigation proceeds. The incident is still to be taken seriously, and CISA has advice on defense, but official attribution will have to wait. The White House has said that, for the most part, U.S. federal agencies successfully avoided infestation by the phishing campaign, and U.S. President Biden says that his upcoming summit with Russia's President Putin will take place as scheduled. That said, industry has been much quicker in attributing the activity to Russian intelligence services, specifically to the SVR, and has shown little disposition to back off that attribution. Foreign Policy writes that one lesson to draw is that deterrence hasn't so far worked in cyberspace. The Journal writes, quote, the latest Nobelium attack, whether it amounts to a significant breach of U.S. government cyber infrastructure or not, shows that Russia has not been deterred by waves of retaliatory U.S. and European sanctions over previous attacks. It also represents the latest example of authoritarian regimes turning to hacking groups to target their rivals abroad, whether foreign governments or human rights advocates." End quote. And the U.S. administration has come under foreseeable pressure to ratchet up the pressure on Moscow. But it doesn't appear that the campaign necessarily represents an escalation in cyber-espionage. As an essay in Wired puts it, it's not that the SolarWinds hackers are back, it's that they never really left. Over the weekend, European journalists published results of an investigation linking U.S. intelligence services to Danish organizations believed to have cooperated in enabling U.S. surveillance of targets in Germany, France, Sweden, and Norway between 2012 and 2014. The Washington Post reports that France's President Macron says that that's no way to treat an ally. The AP records similar reactions from other European governments to the Obama-era snooping. Researchers at Sophos report finding a new ransomware strain in the wild. They call it Epsilon Red. The malware is written in Go, and it was delivered as the final executable payload in a hand-controlled attack against a target in the U.S. hospitality sector. Sophos said, quote, "It appears that an enterprise Microsoft Exchange server was the initial point of entry by the attackers into the enterprise network. It isn't clear whether this was enabled by the proxy logon exploit or another vulnerability, but it seems likely the root cause was an unpatched server. From that machine, the attackers used WMI to install other software onto machines inside the network that they could reach from the Exchange server." End quote. Why Epsilon Red? Sophos shares the etymology, which may be news for anyone not fully up to date with the Marvel universe. In this case, the name comes from the threat actors themselves. Quote, "The name Epsilon Red, like many coined by ransomware threat actors, is a reference to pop culture. The character, Epsilon Red, was a relatively obscure adversary of some of the X-Men in the Marvel Extended Universe, a super soldier alleged to be of Russian origin, sporting 4 mechanical tentacles and a bad attitude." End quote. While the campaign uses complex layers of deception, the ransomware proper is, Sophos says, bare bones. It's a 64-bit Windows executable, and all it does is encrypt the files in the target system. Other functions like communication, deleting shadow copies, killing processes, and so forth have been, according to the researchers, outsourced to PowerShell scripts. And finally, a story that almost seems too good to be true, a kind of harmonic convergence of the biggest trendoid industries out there, cannabis and cryptocurrency, comes out of the English Midlands. CNBC reports that the West Midlands Police, investigating reports that there was a big illicit cannabis farm in an industrial park in Sandwell, found, surprise, a big coin mining operation instead. No cannabis, alas, but there were about 100 rigs whirring away like Alan Turing's bomb, busy mining coin. What's wrong with that, you'll ask, adding dude if you'd like to reinsert the stoner vibe that initially drew the constable's attention. Well, it's this. They weren't paying for their electricity, so they were stealing, according to the Evening Standard, thousands of pounds worth of power. The Standard says, quote, "The IT equipment was seized from the building in the Great Bridge Industrial Estate, and inquiries with Western Power revealed the electric supply had been bypassed." What drew the police attention in the first place, you might be asking for a friend. According to CNBC, suspicions were aroused by, quote, "Many people were visiting the unit at various points of the day," police said, adding there were numerous wiring and ventilation ducts visible. A police drone also detected a lot of heat coming from the building. It's time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Recorded Future. If you haven't already done so, take a look at Recorded Future's Cyber Daily. We look at it. The CyberWire staff subscribes and consults it daily. The web is rich with indicators and warnings, but it's nearly impossible to collect them by eyeballing the internet yourself, no matter how many analysts you might have on staff, and we're betting that however many you have, you haven't got enough. Recorded Future does the hard work for you by automatically collecting and organizing the entire web to identify new vulnerabilities and emerging threat indicators. Sign up for the Cyber Daily email to get the top trending technical indicators crossing the web. Cyber news, targeted industries, threat actors, exploited vulnerabilities, malware, and suspicious IP addresses. Subscribe today and stay ahead of the cyber attacks. Go to recordedfuture.com/cyberwire to subscribe for free threat intelligence updates from Recorded Future. And we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. Researchers at VMware recently released their 2020 Threat Landscape Report, outlining some of the things they see from their unique perspective on internet and data center traffic. Giovanni Vigna is Senior Director of Threat Intelligence at VMware, and he joins us with their findings.
We work with telemetry that we collect from our customer, and since we have sort of a large number of sensors, we have a good view on some of the trends that are happening in the wild in terms of detections, in terms of threats, in terms of how the threats try to avoid detection. And this is true, especially if you look at the problem of protecting a data center, where you can have sort of like problems at scale, as we have seen from the Colonial Pipeline situation. And so what prompted, we wanted to communicate outside what we had seen in our sort of like slice of reality, because there are some insights that are interesting. Of course, we haven't. Some of the insights are not astounding in terms of statistics. They're very understandable, but it's interesting to see some little angles that are sort of surprising, at least to me. For example, we observed that there is still a lot of plain text passwords floating in data centers, which was quite surprising. But then when we looked into it, people actually do that for a variety of reasons. We also looked at how, for example, malware tends to spread laterally once they get a foothold on one of the machines in a particular network. And we saw that a lot of activities based on RDP, which is not surprising per se, but it's interesting to see how essential detecting that lateral movement has become. This, you hear, always about east-west traffic, and it looks like a buzzword, but we found out, since we see a lot of that east-west traffic because of how our sensors are deployed, that this is really a very relevant and useful information to understand the blueprint of a breach.
Yeah, there are some really interesting insights here in your report. I mean, we can start, I guess, with some of the basics, but that email continues to be at the top of the list of attack vectors.
Yeah, this I've been in this field for a long time, and sincerely, this is still surprising me how toxic email is. How this has really become the first sort of like the first step in a kill chain of an attack, has almost always been an email, because unfortunately there is the email is really where you try to break the weakest link in a chain. You just need somebody to click on a link, open an Excel spreadsheet with a malicious Excel4 macro, and fundamentally you have a first point of attack, and you can collect everything from credentials to information that will allow you to spread out and connect to other users using social engineering. So finding out that 4% of the attachments that were received in general contained some form of maliciousness, which is orders of magnitude with respect to any other vector, I think is pretty interesting.
That's Giovanni Vigna from VMware. Now, a word from our sponsor, Enveil, who'd like to dispel some more myths about homomorphic encryption, the kind of encryption that lets you encrypt searches, analytics, and machine learning models. Another big myth is that everything needs to be encrypted in order to leverage homomorphic encryption. Nope. Suppose you're working on a big publicly accessible dataset, say an aggregation of third-party data that's available to everyone. Is it useful? Yes. Sensitive? No. But what you do with it is indeed sensitive. So don't encrypt the big dataset. Instead, encrypt your actions, how you search it, the analytics you run over it. Protect your interests and intent. Encrypt the operations and leave the data where it is and as it is. Secure what truly matters. Visit Inveil.com to find out how our sponsor Inveil's Zero Reveal solution lets you securely leverage data to unlock value. That's Inveil.com. And joining me once again is Ben Yellen. He's from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security and also my co-host over on the Caveat podcast. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Dave.
So we got a story here from the Washington Post, and it's titled, Florida Governor Signs Bill Barring Social Media Companies from Blocking Political Candidates. This is an interesting online policy move here, Ben. What's going on?
I'll start with a dad joke by just saying, signs Bill Barring, and this is not about the former Attorney General. So, sorry, everybody. The actual story here is about a piece of legislation signed into law by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis that takes aim at big tech platforms, specifically social media platforms. So the law does basically two things. The first is give Florida residents a cause of action if they think that tech platforms are applying their content moderation standards in a discriminatory way based on one's political viewpoint. It allows them to sue these tech companies for a pretty inordinate sum of money, and they would be allowed to sue those tech platforms in Florida state court. So that's one provision. The other relates to tech platforms' ability to censor the account or to suspend permanently or temporarily the accounts of active political candidates. So the purpose of this provision is to prohibit tech platforms, the Facebooks and Twitters of the world, from suspending a political candidate for more than, I think it's 14 days in the piece of legislation, during a political campaign. And if they don't abide by that regulation, they would be subject to a $250,000 fine every single day that they allowed that ban to continue.
Wow.
I'll note for posterity that there is a very famous resident of the state of Florida who was banned from multiple social media platforms in a very high-profile way earlier in 2021, and I think it's no coincidence that this piece of legislation has this provision. So it was signed into law. I think a lot of neutral observers have noted that this law is almost certainly blatantly unconstitutional and is likely to get struck down in federal court. And it's basically unconstitutional for two reasons. The first concerns the First Amendment rights of the tech platforms themselves. You know, according to court precedent and a lot of the legal scholars and trade organizations, you know, there's this long-standing doctrine that these tech company platforms have First Amendment rights to regulate their platforms as they see fit. And, you know, as we've learned from a bunch of cases, corporations are people. They do have constitutional rights. And one of those rights is to regulate the content on their platforms. The second major constitutional issue is this issue of preemption. So the federal government has passed a law, the Communications Decency Act, which shields companies from liability, these tech companies, for content moderation decisions on their platforms. And this is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Florida's law that they're passing here would run afoul of that provision. And because, according to our Constitution, the federal government is the supreme governing body of the land, the federal law would preempt the state law. So for those two reasons, it's very likely that this law will be thrown out in court. So I don't think we're ever going to see this law actually come into effect. It's scheduled to come into effect on July 1st of this year. I suspect we'll see a preliminary injunction before we get to that point.
So why bother? What was Florida Governor DeSantis up to here in going through this whole exercise?
So I think this is rather performative on the part of Governor DeSantis. For one, the big boogeyman among his political allies on the right, at least currently, is these big tech platforms and the fact that they are allegedly biased against conservative voices. And this is a high-profile way to make that political point, saying, we're not going to stand for this anymore. We're going to hold these tech platforms accountable. There's also, he's sort of hedging his bets. I mean, very clearly, Ron DeSantis wants to run for president. He's probably secretly hoping that his co-Florida resident, former President Donald Trump, does not run in 2024, and that he would be kind of the natural heir to the Trump legacy. And this is something, obviously, former President Trump cares deeply about because he was deplatformed.
Right.
After the January 6th insurrection, basically every social media platform permanently suspended Trump's accounts. And I think DeSantis knows that this might endear himself politically to some of former President Trump's most diehard supporters.
So we think that the governor is sort of signaling to his supporters that if you bring me to a federal level office, this is the sort of thing I will push for at a national level.
Yeah, I think, there is certainly something politically effective about figuring out ways to punish your enemy through the force of law. And right now, the enemy among a lot of conservatives are these big tech platforms. And there are federal politicians who want to do the same thing. I mean, most notably, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri has been adamant that he wants to institute these types of regulations on big tech platforms. So I think by enacting this law, this is a way for Governor DeSantis to distinguish himself among that field. People like Senator Hawley in 2024 could say, well, I proposed this legislation. And Governor DeSantis can say, well, I actually signed it into law, even though I suspect it will be struck down in our court system. I do think this is largely performative. It is pretty clearly a constitutional violation. But I also don't think it's an unwise move politically for Governor DeSantis, who, despite some buzz, is still kind of an unknown on the political map. And this is a way to endear himself to the conservative movement. Yeah.
All right. Well, interesting policy move here from the folks in Florida. Ben Yelin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Don't forget to check out the Grumpy Old Geeks podcast, where I contribute to a regular segment called Security, Huh? I join Jason and Brian on their show for a lively discussion of the latest security news every week. You can find Grumpy Old Geeks where all the fine podcasts are listed, and check out the Recorded Future podcast, which I also host. The subject there is threat intelligence, and every week we talk to interesting people about timely cybersecurity topics. That's at recordedfuture.com/podcast. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Haru Prakash, Kelsey Bond, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yelin, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow.